and I think it's best if we dive straight in. I'm just gonna share the presentation with you. We're gonna follow that for this session, and then we'll have questions at the end. So can you just confirm that you guys can actually see the? Oh, I didn't want to jump too fast. You can see the presentation. Like, do you see the slides? Okay. I see people saying they can. So once again, my name is Matija, and I will discuss with you today how to debate democracy. An alternative title for the presentation could also be debunking democracy, because what I intend to do is a critique of a contemporary widespread understanding of what democracy means, what democracy should be, what does it mean to fight for democracy. So these all are issues that we shall address in this presentation. So to start, I think we are all watching the US elections this week. I certainly slept way too little this week watching what's happening. This is the current map, how it looks like, and I think a lot of people this week are actually talking about what does it mean, the concept of democracy. What does it mean for an election to be undemocratic? What does it mean for a system to be undemocratic? Are elections a signal of democracy? Are they pertinent to the concept of democracy? Are elections actually something that something crucial for democratic system, or vice versa? Is a system that does not have elections by default undemocratic? So these are all the questions that we're going to be addressing in this session. And the theme of this session, at least the first half of it, is going to be that we are actually going to be trying to find the difference between the institutions of democracy as are present in the contemporary world, so like different systems of elections, etc., from the concept of democracy. So what democracy should be or should mean, or what is the gist, what is the most crucial point of democracy as a concept or as an ideal. So this is what we're gonna start with in this session. This is probably going to preoccupy us for the most part. So how do we recognize democracy? What does democracy mean in a modern world? So in mainstream political science and also in mainstream discourse, we very often equate democracy in its general sense to the institutions of a liberal democracy. So a liberal democracy is what most of us would recognize under the name of democracy nowadays, and for the past 200 years probably. So what is this liberal democracy that that we think of when we think of democracy in general? There's three ways, actually not three ways, like there's three conditions that must be met for a liberal democracy to exist, and those conditions all stem from the Enlightenment era, roughly, not necessarily precisely, but roughly from the Enlightenment era. And since this is a German tournament and a German organized event, we can also call Enlightenment by its proper name, Aufklärung, because if the political action of the Enlightenment the French Revolution, then we can talk about German thought as one of the main propellants. But this might be a bit controversial. I'm a keen reader of Kant and Hegel. Anyhow, the sorry, I'm going to have to go back. Yeah, the three ideas that are necessary for a liberal democracy after the Enlightenment are the rule of law. The rule of law meaning that power is not arbitrary. That power is not arbitrary means that whomever is in power cannot freely do whatever they please. So they need to follow a pre-established set of procedures. This is called the rule of law. This also includes human rights generally, in terms of setting the rights of an individual, the duties of power. So like basically setting the playing field. Okay, what is possible, what isn't possible, how can power be exercised, what kind of power can be exercised, etc., etc. So this is the rule of law, right? This is one of the tenets of a liberal democracy. The second tenet of a liberal democracy would be the separation of branches of government. As you probably heard this 1,000 times before, you have the executive, legislative, and the judicial branch. The idea here is similar to the first tenet. If you separate them, you make sure that there is no absolute ruler, that power is divided in a way where different institutions of power, so different branches of power of government, check each other, make sure that no absolute ruler emerges. And then finally, that there should be some sort of an electoral system, some sort of elections. Well, the fact that they're multi-party means that there is more than one choice, obviously. So this is once again the point that there is no one universal political body that governs everything. That there's like a choice between different entities. So this is what's commonly understood under the term democracy. This is also what, for the most part, media or international bodies are going to be looking for when they are deciding whether or not a system is democratic, right? So, for instance, when you're going to be reading into certain indexes which rate countries, for instance, of how democratic they are, this is probably going to be, no matter what index you look at, this is probably going to be one of the major categories that they actually weigh their judgment on. And now the point of this session is obviously not to explain what a liberal democracy is. And is to criticize this concept and think about it in a different sort of fashion, which is what is the concept of a democracy, and is liberal democracy really the perfect embodiment of that concept? Is a liberal democracy really everything democracy should be, and is perhaps there's something more to what democracy should be? So here I've got a quote. I picked this quote from Wikipedia, which I think represents perfectly the most basic definition of what a democracy should be. So I think this is how most people understand it. This is, I think, the most widespread one. The democracy is a form of government in which the people have the authority to choose their governing legislation. So yeah, so is this the concept of democracy? Is this what democracy is all about? Like, seems straightforward enough, right? Like, most people would read this and say, well, yeah, this is what the democracy is. However, I don't think so. Or hope maybe after this session you won't think so as well. So this sentence here, the democracy is a form of government in which the people have the authority to choose their governing legislation, is rested upon yeah, sorry about that, is rests upon basically two assumptions. Like there might be more, if you really thought about it structurally, like probably there's more assumptions to it, but I think for our purposes these two are crucial. So first of all, obviously, it assumes that there is a government which possesses a monopoly over violence. What does monopoly over violence mean? It means that there is a government, a body basically, which is the absolute sovereign leader of a certain territory, right? So that means basically how to understand it. For instance, you would not have a monopoly over violence if a part of your country were rebelling, or if the police could not keep order for a sustained period of time, etc., etc. This assumption is important because it already tells us that the general definition of democracy deals about not necessarily any other situation. And there are other situations, right? I'm not here meaning, okay, what about people who live in total anarchy? But there are certain structures in which we as human beings interact with one another. We do not have a government which is a total sovereign. One of them, for instance, would be core family units, or in some situations, the workplace interaction between people who are not hierarchically different from each other, etc., etc. So already the concept of democracy, as though you can choose your own government, to most extent assumes a regular, political process within a country. But even more important assumption, which is even more problematic, is that if you say that a democracy is only something, some system where you choose your own government, basically the assumption here is that all power is centralized within said government. Why is this the assumption, and why is this assumption problematic? Well, if we say that democracy is rule of the people, if we say, well, which is basically what the demos kratos means, right? Demos means people, kratos power in ancient Greek. And if we say that this is an ideal we strive for, then to say that democracy is basically choosing your own government means that the power that the government possess is the only, or perhaps the most crucial source of power there is in a system. And this is precisely what I think we should examine, what we should object to. Because what if there are other sources of power, but you do not have access or democratic to those sources of power within a society? So this is then the issue, the issue that I think is crucial for discussion. Why? Because if there are sources of power that are not the government, that means then that the liberal democracy is not going to be, wholly democratic, because it is going to leave areas of power. It's going to leave authority, which is not the government, that you have no democratic vote for, which then means that, your and and here is the a more broadened idea of why that assumption does not hold true. Um, so basically, those 2 points are not so much two different points, as much as they are actually an evolution of the same point. So we start off by saying that power is never centralized, and there's two ways to think about this. We're going to be thinking about a tangible way. We're going to be thinking about it in a tangible way later on, where we actually, discuss quite specifically where there's power which is outside of the scope of government, but in an abstract fashion. And this is for those of you who might be interested in reading more on the subject. The abstract notion that power is never centralized is expressed best, in my opinion, also probably the most explicit by Foucault, the French author of the 20th century. Especially, I think I'm going to write down the full title of the book after the session in the chat, but Knowledge, Power, the Subject is one of the books where he discusses this idea that power is never centralized. But basically, on the abstract level, the point he makes, if we stop here just briefly, is that power is not perhaps just a very concrete thing you possess. If you have a king, this is an example Foucault uses very often. The power that a king has is not vested by some god in the crown that he wears. There is nothing magical about the king that gives him. The king might be, totally bizarre. If you remember the story about I think it's from Andersen, the story about the naked ruler. Is he emperor, the naked emperor, emperor's new clothes, I think is the title. The leader can be totally bizarre. The king can be, funny. He can be like Trump, people laugh at him. But the reason why a king is still king is not because there is something mystical or magical about him, but rather that his subordinates believe in his authority. And that means that the power is not just with the king because of his crown, but rather the power is within the relation between the king and his subordinates. And then Foucault goes on to say that because of this, it is wrong to look for the sole source of power within a sovereign government, but rather that power materializes itself in every interpersonal relationship, so that there is, power and authority in every relationship you ever have. That means that you can trace power to you hanging out with friends, or perhaps to your family relations, or perhaps to how you behave with strangers, to basically every aspect of human life. And this might seem very abstract, perhaps even too abstract to be ever directly used in a debate. But I think it's interesting because it's going to help you understand the points we make further on. And now the question of democracy in this context would be in a general fashion to say, well, if we want to share power, if we want to include all participants in decision making, that should not be limited to just the government, but most other all other forms of life. Of course, I think here you can also read Foucault in a very, very radical sense, because the very radical idea here that Foucault, gestures to is basically, he has a very cool quote at some point where he says that political theory has decapitated the king. So yeah, the king was replaced with a democratically elected government. But the structural position of the king, so of government and power in general, is still standing, and this is the task he sets out for himself. So in a radical way, you could read him you could read Foucault as calling for rebelling to any form of power. But this is not our goal here today. We are basically just limiting ourselves to saying that, democracy perhaps is not just voting for power. And then in a more tangible way, this is what we're going to do next. The power is never limited to the executive, legislative, and judicial powers of we are going to yeah, by the way, sorry that I'm always switching out when I switch slides, but the Zoom decided that this is that it's not going to let me at peace. There's always something new with it. I hope you can still follow, even though that be the case. But yeah, now we're going to discuss these tangible sort of places where power is that is not the government. Now there is probably many different ways to discuss that. But what we're going to do today is we're going to ask ourselves a very simple question, which is we're going to assume that power that exists exists in a way where it influences an individual's life. So we are going to say, well, power is that which conditions the life of an individual. So basically, we're going to say that power manifests itself in the conditions of an individual's life. Again, like you might now say, well, this is an arbitrary assumption that you're making. And I say, well, yes, you might have other ways to approach this. And I'm not saying they are incorrect, but I'm saying that for our sort of the journey of mind and spirit that we are engaging in here, I think this is the fastest way to get there. And now, for simplicity's sake, we are going to categorize the conditions of an individual's life in just three ways. Now, probably sociologists or psychologists or anyone, political scientists, anyone at this point would say, well, things are a bit more complex. Once again, you're dividing things quite arbitrarily, and here I especially would agree with such criticism. But again, I think this is the best and easiest way to illustrate a point, so that you're best going to be able to that you're going to be best able to understand what I actually mean. And yeah, so we're going to talk about three different conditions of an I have to go out and go back in. But yeah, wait. Did I skip a slide, or are we? Yeah. Okay. Let's stay here for a second. We don't want to jump ahead. Terribly sorry about that. So just briefly, the social environment would be just what it is, the social environment. And I'm now going to assume that most people will socialize and spend their free time with, for instance, their family, whatever that means in whichever cultural context, and whatever, with their friends, close ones, etc. And already the social environment is, you can probably agree quite easily, very important for the life of an individual. It dictates and sets the tone for large parts of that individual's life. And here, it's all about what kind of a relationship you can form. So if you're romantically involved, um, are you romantically involved with the person you want to be? Is there any barriers, for instance, if you are not heteronormative? Can you actually, form a relationship with a person of, for instance, the same gender as you are? Or what are your limitations to starting a family? Is there perhaps like, class or caste system that prevents you or allows you to form a family that way, or one way or another, etc. Furthermore, in terms of the cultural context, it is, once again, what are you or aren't you allowed to do within the scope of your life? Like, is the society going to enable you to, for instance, I don't know, proclaim yourself to be non-binary? Is it going to be culturally appropriate for you to, for instance, study humanities or social studies, which very often, for instance, um, is not appropriate, especially in the areas of lesser socioeconomic development, such as to so just so that whenever I go out of the screen share and back in, it's so that I can click cancel on Zoom, telling me it wants to switch my audio to an inexisting microphone. um, I'm not sure why it does that, but hey, I'm not very good at IT. But yeah, okay. What influences the conditions of an individual's life? So again, we could spend hours here trying to think of either more categories or perhaps categorizing them differently. But again, I'm not really, so I'm not trying to present to you an actual robust, philosophical or any other system of political science. Perhaps I'm trying to illustrate a point. Don't do not be do not hold any grudges on me if one day someone explains these categories a tad differently. But I think here we can see the main ones. So first of all, yeah, we do have the power that is exercised by the sovereign body, so the body who has monopoly over violence. This is, in modern days, usually the state, but not always. Not always. There is not always a clear sovereign body, at least not in a way we are used to. Um, and I think one such example would probably be the Western Sahara territory, which is kind of controlled by Morocco, but it's a very complicated dispute, and the power exercise there is, you know, it's a bit debatable who controls the region to what extent. There's places like Transnistria. I think that's the name of a territory in Moldavia that has its own sort of government, um, etc., etc. But generally, in the 2020, and I think the same could be said for the past probably 200 years, a lot of control, a lot of power is indeed vested in a sovereign body, a government of some sort that has monopoly over violence. That means that basically they have the police force, in worst case scenario the army, some sort of a judicial system that executes the law, some sort of an executive branch that governs, some sort of legislative branch that creates law. Perhaps they're united, perhaps they are separated, who knows, but there is in most cases a government which has a lot of control over the aspects of an individual's life. But furthermore, a lot of times, and this is another big one, a big control over an individual's life is exerted by economic forces. Now, one way to think about it in nowadays in most scenarios probably is to think about market forces. So the way the market behaves influences your life dramatically. For instance, if you are a factory worker that worked in the automobile industry in the USA 20 years ago, probably your life took a dramatic turn for the worse in the past 20 years because a lot of industries moving from the USA towards south, so either towards Mexico, the rest of Latin America, perhaps even the rest of the global south. And this impacted your life quite substantially. You went from a probably a relatively well-paying and stable job to either taking pay reductions or even losing your job in many cases. And here we can see look, it might seem odd to say that this is a power in its own right, but you cannot deny the fact that the economic forces, in this case we were mentioning the market forces of the moving car industry. We could also mention, for instance, just a I don't know, bad weather conditions made the harvest really bad. I don't know, but at any rate, no matter the way you look at it, economic forces influence your life to a very large extent. Perhaps for an average individual, perhaps even more than um, what the government does. So for instance, if we take a look at the USA one more time, look, the USA as a political
Pushnik, your voice cut out.
We cannot hear you.